So welcome. Great to see so many of you here. For those who don't know me, my name is Helen Juice, and I'm the Interim Senior Advisor for Gender Diversity and Inclusion in CGIAR workplaces. And I'm delighted to welcome you all to this event that's been organised by our Wellness Employee Resource Group. So supported by the CGIAR GDI function, wellness at CGIAR has been focused on topics related to physical and emotional health and well-being. Obviously, this is an important subject right now because we're all still dealing with the pandemic and also a lot of uncertainty and increased workloads to do with the transition to One CGIAR. So we know that right now this is a time when many of us want to spend more time thinking about our well-being and our mental health. So the type of activities that the Wellness ERG plan to focus on include educational seminars, webinars on wellness, contests, group discussions, and other practical health-focused activities. And the Wellness ERG is open to everyone and provides a forum for staff to express themselves openly. And there'll be more details at the end about how you can get involved. And we're hoping that you will all think about joining the ERG. But for now, I want to introduce Edwin, who's going to be facilitating this session. So I shall hand over to him.
Thank you, Helen, for the warm introduction, and welcome to today's session on how to be a mental health ally. Before we begin, I recognize that we are all in different physical locations right now, and I'd like to invite you all to arrive at this space together. We recognize the distractions and stresses of our day-to-day, and we're going to take a moment to center ourselves, and I'll invite you to join me in this guided meditation. Feel free to close your eyes and get yourself in a comfortable, grounded position as I read out this meditation from Headspace. No matter what's going on in your life right now, no matter how many thoughts are racing around your mind, no matter how the body's feeling, just take a moment to sit down and take a big, deep breath, breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth. As you breathe in, a sense of taking in fresh air. The lungs expanding. As you breathe out, a sense of letting go of any stress in the body, in the mind. Just feeling the muscles soften and relax. We'll do this one more time. Breathing deeply in through the nose and out through the mouth. And just take the moment to pause and allow the thoughts to come and go. And then gently open your eyes again. I always enjoy doing this meditation whenever we talk about mindfulness, well-being, and wellness as well. It's always a good way to ground us. And to open up today's session, I'd like to hand it over to our executive management team member, Kundavi Kadurisan, the Managing Director of Global Engagement and Innovation. Kundavi, over to you.
Thank you very much, Edwin. Really appreciated that, and also guiding us through this meditation exercise. I also wanted to convey on behalf of the executive management team a deep appreciation to this Wellness ERG for organizing this event. And I'm really happy to see that as an organization that we are providing a space and a place to talk about mental health. It also means how we as an organization consider this as a priority for staff well-being. And it is also a recognition how mental health is an integral and essential component of health. But yet, globally, even in those countries where it's now still in many of the countries where it is neglected, and it is also misunderstood in the area of public health. So the more we talk about it, there is also a better understanding. I was very struck by the statistics that the team shared with me, that it highlights why we should be focusing on mental health. And just the number itself, close to 1 billion people are living with a mental disorder. And I would think perhaps this might even be an underestimation, right? But that's the nature and size of what we are looking at. And mental and behavioral disorders such as depression and anxiety is actually impacting the global economy in 1 trillion in each year in lost productivity. That's the economic and financial aspects of it. But just if you look at people as human beings to live a happy and productive life, there is no value of money in that, if you're talking about that, right? So therefore, there are severe implications, both not only in the workplace and societies, but as human beings, as people, to be able to live a healthy, happy life. So how can we make the workplace also a place where the people feel safe, supported, and also openly speak about this topic as well? The good news is, even in the media, everywhere that we talk about, there is a lot more comfort these days. The sort of noted figures, whether they are in the political space or big sports people or movie stars and whoever, are now openly talking about it. So in that sense, that itself is a good signaling that it is okay to talk if there are issues. And that's what we really also are providing in the workplaces. We hear about people having, physical issues, back pain, headaches, this issue and that issue. These physical wellness, emotional wellness, and spiritual, we talk about mind, body, and soul, right? All how interlinked that they are. So in that sense, it's very important that we really address that this is a serious issue to be looked at. And therefore, within the organization, how can we provide and create a psychologically safe space for us to openly discuss about mental health? And also because research has shown that we can actually live more happier, less stressed, and more confident and productive in our jobs, in our family settings, if we are able to head on address this issue. So in that sense, I have to say the younger generation are actually getting better. They are able to speak about it much more. And therefore, we should provide this opportunity of sessions like this. And I'm sure you'll learn a lot of tools and tips from this. But what I wanted to signal very strongly is that as an organization, we place this as a huge priority for staff well-being. And therefore, this exercise that we are practicing through allyship that you will hear, and making mental health a priority, is an organization at the very top level that we are serious to ensure that people place this as a priority, and we are there to help as well. With that, I'm really excited for Edwin from your Include Consulting to help us learn more about this mental health, and also take us through the journey and what we can do to help us and help each other. And we can be better, be prepared and managing our mental health, physical health, everything by practicing what you're going to be sharing with us. With that, I wanted to also thank that so many of you have signed up for this, which also means you have given priority. But also the messages you take from this, please pass this on to colleagues who haven't participated, because that's what we want to do, spread the message that mental health, physical health all of that is very integrated and we need to pay attention to it. And thank you so much, colleagues who organized this, and really appreciate, and I hope you have a good session in the remaining part of it. I, for one, have to jump off, but I can tell you, I learned meditation even as a young child. You know, in India, meditation is very big. So you learn from you are a little one. So I can understand and appreciate the importance of this. Over to you, Edwin, and colleagues who organized it. Thank you very much. Good luck.
Thank you for the warm opening. So let's give you a quick overview of the agenda that we have for this hour session. In the beginning, we're going to start by understanding and unpacking what mental health is. Next, we'll talk about the challenges that individuals can face in the workplace when it comes to discussions around mental health. And then we'll move into how can we practice allyship and actually create safe workplaces where everyone can bring their full selves to work. So I have 3 tips for you to get the most out of this workshop. Number 1, participate actively. Right after this, we're going to do just a quick poll and also using Mentimeter to hear your sentiments and to get some of your feedbacks as well. Secondly, be curious and listen to the contents that we're put together. We've looked at multiple research and we'll share all the sources as well, which you will get a recording of the deck in itself after this workshop. And lastly, I do recognize that conversing and discussing about mental health can be oftentimes uncomfortable, and I encourage you to embrace it and to acknowledge that this is a topic that we need to recognize, but it's often avoided and not really talked about. And I hope today we can create the space of discussing more and more about what mental health is and why is it so important. So without further ado, let's begin. What you're going to get very shortly is a link to join the Mentimeter, and I will also share it on my screen as well. Just give me a second. And let's start with a really simple poll. The question: our mental health is determined by a range of socio-economic, biological, and environmental factors. Is this true or false? So I'll just base it on the responses and I'll show the results really shortly after that. Is it true or false? You can also log in on menti.com and use the code that you see on the top screen to log in and key in your answer. Our mental health is determined by a range of socio-economic, biological, and environmental factors. Is this true or false? Just give it a Okay, based on the results, I can see majority of us have voted true, and that is correct. It is true. Mental health is an integral and essential component of health in itself. We all have mental health, and multiple socioeconomic, biological, environmental factors actually end up determining the level of our mental health, ranging from high to low at any certain point of our time. For example, to put into some perspective, is if an individual has experienced violence, social pressures, a stressful work environment, or potentially discrimination, this could result in someone having lower mental health, for example. As we can see, we are influenced by all of these factors that determine our mental health state from high to low. Let's go to the next question. It will be slightly interesting to see your responses. Okay, so One who is mentally healthy is considered mentally healthy when they do not have a mental illness. So one is mentally healthy or considered to be mentally healthy when they do not have a mental illness. Is this true or false? Let's show some of the results. As we can see, majority of you have chosen false, and that is correct. Being mentally healthy is more than just the absence of a mental illness. Mental health is a state of well-being, and it is completely different from the concept of what we define mental illness. We recognize that people do get confused or see them as the opposite of being mentally healthy is having a mental illness. They are on separate, they do have separate definitions, and we'll walk through them next, but we do also recognize that they're interconnected as well. So let's unpack these two different concepts all together. So according to the Center for Disease Control, we define a mental illness as a formally diagnosed health condition that affects a person's thinking, feeling, behavior, or their mood. An example of a type of mental illness can include depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, or schizophrenia. And a mental illness can range from being serious to minimal, or even an individual diagnosed with no mental illnesses at all. So this is how we define a mental illness, and it ranges from serious to minimal or not present at all in an individual. On the other hand, as we discussed earlier, mental health is a state of well-being that we all have. And according to the World Health Organization, they define it as a state of well-being in which an individual realizes their own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively, and is able to make a contribution to their economy or their communities. And this includes, when we look at well-being, emotional, social, and psychological aspects of one's well-being. So looking at the difference between the two, what actually has been found is that one can be diagnosed with a mental illness as well, but can also be mentally healthy, as there are two different concepts altogether. As I'll repeat it again, an individual diagnosed with a mental illness like anxiety or bipolar or schizophrenia can actually be in a state of high mental health if they do have self-esteem, that they realize their abilities, they can cope with the stresses of life as well. And hence, they are two different concepts altogether. I hope that clarifies. So if we look at mental health and explore that concept further, I'd like to share the work that was done by Corey Keyes, who is an American sociologist and psychologist known for his work and studies across mental health. And in his research, he found that mental health is a continuum of two ends, from high to low. At the high end of an individual with high levels of mental health, he coins the term of one being in a state where they are flourishing. When you are in a state of flourishing, you have energy, you are in flow, you feel joyful, and you feel very engaged in the work. And what he found in those studies, that individuals who are in a constant state of flourishing found that they had fewer missed days at work, they are at lower risk of cardiovascular diseases, and demonstrate high positive psychological traits like intimacy and resilience. And on the other end of the mental health continuum is what he coins low mental health, and the term used to describe that is a term called languishing. And for some of you, that could have been the experience that even myself, I went through during the pandemic period. It's the best way to describe it as where it feels meh, right? It feels that it's empty, dissatisfaction, and life feels stagnant. So if you notice that you're feeling either disconnected or disassociated, being irritable, confused, or not also really wanting to engage, that could be a signal of low mental health, and the state is called languishing. And as human beings, we navigate and oscillate through these continuums from high to low. What is also important, and the implications of this, of what he found in the studies, is that he found that individuals who constantly are at a state where they found themselves languishing, the risk of being diagnosed with a major depressive episode, in this scenario, a mental illness, were nearly 6 times greater among languishing than individuals who were flourishing as well. So it's so important for us to be really cognizant around where we are in this mental health continuum, and recognizing the implications to make sure to keep us sound and aware, and having open conversations about it. So what I'm going to do shortly is to revisit our Mentimeter, and I'll like you to reflect on one key question. And not to worry, you don't need to type your responses or your explanations. We just like to get a general sense about how you're feeling. So if we look at this continuum here, I'd like you to pause and reflect over the past 6 months or the past year, and ask yourself, where do you honestly place yourself on the continuum? So if you log into the Mentimeter, you should now be able to see the question and be able to place yourself on a scale of 1 to 5. Where would you place yourself on the continuum? 1, at a clear state of constant languishing. 2, 3, 4, or 5, a state of constant flourishing. Where would you place yourself? And I also appreciate you for being comfortable and vulnerable enough to share your sentiment even on this call. As we can see, I see a nice similar bell curve, and we can see that we are always either oscillating around the continuum, and most of us tend to always find ourselves right in the center. So the key question here for us to be able to be cognizant of is, where am I generally on this continuum, and how do I recognize that for individuals who really want to be at the peak of health, how do I put myself in a state of flourishing? What are some tips that I could look into? And we can share that with you actually in some research data after this webinar as well, which you will be able to find on the wellness site. So let's move on to the next question. Now that you were able to share where you put yourself on the continuum, the next one I want to be curious to hear from you is, how comfortable are you to discuss about mental health in the workplace? Either talking about a mental health challenge you're going through with a colleague, for example. How comfortable are you from a scale of 1, not comfortable at all the way to 5, feeling very comfortable and open to talk about it? Once again, thank you so much for having the courage to share your open, honest responses to these polls. And as you can see here, what I'm observing is that most of us are maybe not the most comfortable to open up and to discuss about mental health in the workplace. And let me elaborate further of what research has found that could potentially explain this. So researchers at the Institute of Psychiatry at the King's College of London examined data from about 144 studies, which included over 90,000 participants from across the globe. And they found that people are often very uncomfortable talking about mental health or mental illness because of the stigma attached to it. And therefore, what they find is that people are not willing to ask for help, seek professional support, and seek the right care that they need, even though it might be present in the workplace. And studies have found that it is the fear of how they might get treated, shame that they might get, or embarrassment from others, preventing people to seeking help. And we all know that we have been impacted by the pandemic and it has taken a toll on our mental health. And we recognize that this stigma is pervasive and one that is very real and one that we definitely need to address. So one thing that's very clear to us here is that we still have a long way to go to create spaces where we can comfortably talk about our mental health. And only then can we really reap the benefits of an individual bring their full potential to the workplace. And in order to do this, what has been proven to help create more safe and open spaces is every individual practicing allyship. And fun fact, the word allyship was actually the most searched word on dictionary.com in 2020. So it's become such an important word and concept. And now we're going to move on to this section around understanding how can we start our journey to be a mental health ally. So before we dive into that, I would love to hear from you. What are some of the words that come to mind when you think about allyship? Type in a few words that come to mind. You might have come across this term before, you might have heard about it, or even attended a workshop on it. I'd love to hear from you. What are some of the initial words that come to mind when you think about allyship? You think about friendship, you think about support. I can see mutual respect, understanding, community, confidence. Great. Listening. And being an advocate and trusting each other. Absolutely great, and all very relevant terms. One of the things that I would like to encourage us to do, and shortly after, I'll explain and define allyship for all of us to have a common understanding. I want to highlight and just show it through a short little video around why allyship is important and how just asking and being honest and open about creating safe spaces for someone to actually share how they're doing can actually make a difference and be the first step of practicing allyship. So this is a short video produced by the UK in their efforts to really create a better conversation around mental health. So I'll play the video shortly after this. I'll just mute myself.
We asked, how are you feeling? But how are you really feeling?
I think I would say I'm fine, I'm okay, just not to get into any details.
I would say, fine, thank you.
I'm fine.
Why? Because sometimes we don't want to tell other people how we are actually feeling because we don't want to be judged, or we don't want to burden them with our problems if we aren't feeling well, or we're afraid to tell them how we're actually feeling. But I do believe we should be honest with our feelings.
I feel that how I feel affects other people in my life.
and I'd rather temporarily give them an answer that would be more uplifting.
Usually I'd say I'm fine.
I'm good, thank you. Fine.
I'm fine.
Many times I've found myself in my life that I've had to pretend with people. It's not their fault, a lot of it, but I've had to pretend with some people so as I don't let them, you know, just maybe some of them, like I said, maybe some of them wouldn't understand, and probably I don't expect them to.
I'm fine, thank you.
I'm fine. Sometimes people ask you how you are, but they don't really mean how are you. It's just sort of a thing they're saying as like hello or whatever. But if someone really wants to know how I'm feeling, I will tell you. I would just say I'm fine.
There's nothing more boring than hearing a list of ailments from somebody when all you really need to know is whether actually he's okay or she, or whether there's anything that really he or she really wants to talk about, which is seldom in terms of casual acquaintances.
If it's a sort of ritual, cliche kind of conversation, you're passing somebody in a corridor at work, then you just answer what you answer, and it's usually positive.
Fine, everything's wonderful in the world.
As we can see, let me just stop the video there. Hope you enjoyed it. What we got to hear in that video was people, everyday people, just sharing about how what challenges they face and how they would respond to a simple question around how are you? And what we can see are some individuals are on that journey to really provide the allyship for people to open up, and some not so much, or beginning to just slowly reevaluate what that truly means and how can we truly stand up for one another. And we are all at different stages on this allyship journey. And let's focus it now on how can we be better for individuals who might be struggling with mental health issues. So to simply put, allyship is defined by looking at it into two different ways. By starting with ourselves, we see allyship as an active, lifelong journey where it's the consistent practice of unlearning and reevaluating one's beliefs and actions. Really asking yourself, am I feeling safe to be able to share and talk openly about my mental health? What have I been brought up when it comes to opening up about mental health? Is it safe to do? How do I respond to people who do bring up their challenges to me? What's my immediate reaction? So it's actually looking at ourselves first, recognizing what are the values and beliefs and the cultures that have been brought up in when it comes to mental health and talking about it, and taking the effort to unlearn and reevaluate it within ourselves. And with that newfound belief and action, using it to work in solidarity with a marginalized individual or a group of people who might be struggling with mental health challenges and issues. So it really starts by looking inwards to support the group that really need the chance to be able to openly share when you ask them, how are you? And why does allyship really matter? Because what research has found is that allyship can be a powerful force for good. Because when just one individual starts practicing the right form of allyship, it helps others to feel supported, heard, included, and a strong sense of belonging. And when other people see this in play, they feel motivated to step up. And research has shown that when people step up and they observe and practice the right behaviors, it shifts the culture of one that is more inclusive and one that's more safe. And that is where we can see the allyship that is a powerful force, and that anyone at any part of the organization can contribute and be motivated to step up in order to shift the culture that we want to see. We do recognize that it comes with challenges as well, and a lot of mistakes that we might make along the way, but this is part of the journey that we have to embrace all together to see the outcomes and the culture that we want to experience. So to simply break it down, let's share 2 simple types of allyship actions. We'll walk you through each one and give you some practical tips of how to practice it in the moment. There are individual actions, and these actions are ways that we could educate ourselves, for us to model the good behavior, or simply to change our mindsets altogether. And there are also interpersonal actions. It's our actions that we can use to support others through our day-to-day interactions, particularly in scenarios where we are talking with our colleagues about mental health, or if somebody comes up to us to talk about a mental health issue. So let's talk about individual allyship actions first. We'll share with you just 4 simple things that you could try practicing right after this webinar. Firstly, be open to share about your current state of mental health and your struggles as well. Almost everyone has experienced some form of discomfort over this period. And when you are open about your mental health struggles, it opens the doors for others to feel comfortable talking about it with you. And it really makes you appear human, relatable, and courageous. And research has shown that such authentic actions can cultivate trust and improve employee engagement and performance as well. Secondly, model healthy behaviors. It is one thing to just say that we care about mental health and I think it's important. It's another thing to walk the talk. So prioritizing self-care and setting boundaries is equally as important. Openly share that you're taking a walk in the middle of the day after, a stressful series of meetings, or be open to be able to share that you're going to set yourself a session to meet with a therapist to discuss your mental health, or prioritizing periods in your calendar that you would not like to be disturbed because you have other roles to play as well, or a staycation that you are going to take and actually turning off your notifications and your emails so that you are prioritizing yourself and setting the boundaries that you need for you to be at a state of flourishing. Thirdly, simply educate yourself about mental health topics. And a great way to start is visiting our wellness ERG site for you to learn all about the tips about mental health and getting the right resources as well, so that you are better equipped to have the right conversations with others. And we'll share some of these resources with you at the end of this webinar as well. And lastly, we need to also pay attention to our language and choose the right words. When it comes to mental health and mental illness, the words we use matter more than we think. Language is such a powerful tool for creating awareness and also overcoming the stigma that we've mentioned is a big barrier for us to overcome. So how do we make sure that we are choosing the right words? Let's show you some examples. So in this scenario, I'm going to share with you some examples that I also found quite interesting myself to avoid potentially saying, and what are some better alternatives as well. So if we found out from information or from passing, or has someone shared that they might be diagnosed with a mental illness, we highly recommend to avoid saying, oh, that mentally ill person. What this creates here is that we are making the individual's mental illness a big part of their identity. When we recognize an individual is more than just this part of their identity, there's so much more that makes a person unique. So one of the things we avoid is actually putting that mental illness right in front of the person. And this is trying to make sure that we avoid this. And also, we highly recommend avoid saying they suffer from a mental illness. This also creates a negative stigma that a mental illness is a bad thing altogether. As we mentioned earlier, a person could be diagnosed with a mental illness, but actually be at a state where they have high mental health and are actually flourishing. So what you could instead say is a person living with a mental illness, or a person with a mental illness. This ensures that you're putting the person first and then mentioning that person is being diagnosed with a mental illness second. So we're always trying to put the people-centered language first altogether. Very simple switch, but actually means a lot when we're having such conversations. Secondly, and I know myself that I'm very guilty of this, when we notice certain behaviors in ourselves or also in other people, we might tend to say, oh, that person is so OCD, or I am so OCD, I like everything clean and organized. Or we might say, for someone who is constantly experiencing a change in mood and we observe it, we might actually say that person is actually being so bipolar. What's up with them? But what we're doing here is that we are once again potentially stigmatizing mental health and mental illnesses altogether, because what we're using is using a diagnosed mental illness to describe a behavior. And what this could mean is that it could really sound, when we use such terminologies, they could sound like indictments. And if a colleague could be actually experiencing and being diagnosed with OCD or bipolarism, would this individual openly seek help? Would they openly share this with you? So instead of using such terminologies to describe behavior, why not just use the actual behaviors that we see and observe? So actually say, oh, that person seems highly organized and neat. Or if you notice a change in their mood over time, you could simply say, I noticed a change in their mood this week. And this is really helping a lot to destigmatize mental health and making sure that we're using the right terms accordingly so that people feel safe and can openly bring it up if it ever is needed to. So very simple switch in choosing our words wisely that could make a very big difference, and a sample of some of these individual allyship actions that you could consider after this webinar. So from individual, let's move to interpersonal. Once we are more aware about mental health, we need to be equipped with a safe and simple approach that we can remember and recall whenever we are faced or have to discuss mental health, or particularly if someone came up to you to talk about their mental health challenge. And it's important to keep in mind that this person approaching you with their mental health challenges had probably had to overcome a lot of fear to talk to you about this topic. The person has done something very challenging and potentially very risky. And the best that we could do is give them the right support and be there for them. And a simple framework that I recommend that is actually taught in mental health first aid training is the Algae Approach. And let's simply break this down. First and foremost, we approach. And what happens here is we assess for crisis or risk or the potential suicide or harm that this individual might be facing or what you're observing. And then based on that, approach and check in with the person. And most importantly, if you would like to have a conversation about what you're observing, get their permission. It's so important that we make sure that we are on their terms, especially if we are trying to approach them first as well. And once we've approached and we've got their permission and they allow us to check in with them, the next thing to do is to listen. And what happens here is that we want to make sure the other person feels heard without judgment and do our best not to interrupt. Really holding any thoughts about what you might want to say immediately to comfort or to even help the person, put that aside and just let them speak without judgment, without interruption. And after they've shared, give. Provide reassurance that their experience is valid and that it's real to them and this is their lived experience. And this is helping them to feel safe that whatever they're feeling is theirs and theirs to own as well. The last thing we want to avoid is to invalidate it or to make them doubt themselves accordingly. And once we've given that reassurance, we encourage. At this point, if asked or if requested, we can share the knowledge that we have, the tips and the resources and approaches available for them to seek out help. So this is simply put the Algae approach, from approach, listen, give, and encourage. What I like about this framework is that you do not need to be a certified therapist or a certified professional to help someone through and solve their mental health or mental illness concerns. What the goal of this framework provides is for you to be the bridge and for you to be the guide to get them to eventually seek out the support that they need. So this is very simple, just like first aid as well. So let's put this Algae framework into just a very simple example in a conversation with a potential colleague who came up to me to share about their mental health challenges. And I'll apply the Algae framework that you see here. So as the approach, I would say, I recognize that this has been a tough period for you. I really wanted to take the time to check in on how you're doing. Would you like to talk about it? And at this point, I'm asking for their permission. And if they say no, I will immediately recognize and say, that's totally okay. But if ever you do want to have a conversation with me about mental health or your struggles, you can always reach out to me. So what I'm giving is the openness to make sure that this person can reach out to me when they want to. And of course, at the moment when I ask and they do want to talk about it, I move to listen. And I'll say, take your time, I'm with you, I'm sitting right here beside you, and I'll be listening. And after they've shared their experiences, I'll paraphrase what I've heard, so to make sure that I fully understood them and make sure the other person feels understood as well. So what I'm hearing is that you shared that over this period, you've seen times that you're disengaged or dissatisfied, and just to make sure that I've reiterated what I've heard. And then we move into give. I'll first like to validate them and thank them for actually sharing this experience with me, as I recognize that it's not easy. And to reassure them by saying, you are allowed to feel this way. Your feelings are valid and they matter to me as your colleague. And lastly, I'll move to encourage. So tell me, how can I be of support to you without overstepping? And if you need any support at all, because I want to make sure it's about them and what they really need. And if so, and if they would like to seek support, I would share. Would you like for me to share with you a list of options available that could help you navigate through these challenges that you're facing? And provide them the list accordingly. So these are some of the words and verbatims that you could use when having a conversation about someone who might be struggling with mental health. Approach, listen, give, encourage. A simple Algae approach altogether. And to wrap up, some simple do's and don'ts when it comes to having such discussions. Do, as we've seen before, appreciate them for opening up. It takes a lot of courage and probably a lot of time for them to consider opening up to you. Secondly, follow the other person's lead in terms of what they want to share. Oftentimes, we might be curious and want to find out more because we genuinely are wanting to show support for them. But it's their story to tell, and only they can decide how much they feel comfortable with sharing. And we should not be getting them or egging them on to share more. And as mentioned before, we are not here to immediately cure them or solve their issues for them. We're here to be the bridge to resources and professional help if needed as well. And these are some of the top do's. For don'ts, we recommend not to pressure anyone to discuss about their mental health. We hope that once you started opening up more and sharing your own struggles and your as well, people will open up to you. But we should not be pressuring anyone by asking them, how's your mental health today? It could be very pressurizing, and once again makes it very hard for them to eventually open up. Secondly, we recommend not to make it a big deal when one person does open up to you. It's important that we normalize the conversation so that it removes the stigma altogether. And lastly, especially when we're trying to empathize and to help them, we might bring in our own experience that, oh, I've been through that too. I've had this happen to me. The last thing we want to do is to make it about you, because what we recognize is that allyship is about the other person as well. So these are our top do's and don'ts when you're navigating through interpersonal allyship actions for one another. So we've just walked through some key actions that you can consider at an individual level as well as an interpersonal level. So what I'd like to move forward is on our last Mentimeter question is for you to ponder and reflect. What are some actions and perhaps just one action that you would like to commit towards becoming a mental health ally? Individual actions include being open about your mental health, being able to set better boundaries for yourself and be a good role model, using the right language and reading up more about mental health. To be better at practicing interpersonal allyship, we can approach using the Algae framework as well, where we assess, we listen, we give assurance, and we encourage them. What is one action that you like to commit towards better doing for yourself to become a better mental health ally for yourself and for your colleagues as well? Setting boundaries, giving support, role model, learn more about it, absolutely. Give support, better self-care, encourage others. Give time, talk openly. These are great actions. And as we see, when we all start practicing allyship, it becomes a great force for good for shifting the culture. Okay, this is great. So thank you so much for contributing and participating in all the interactivity that we've had so far on Mentimeter. So to wrap up on this section, what is most important that we'd like to share with you, and we recognize that mental health is still a concept that is misunderstood and it's stigmatized in our workplaces, making it very hard for us to talk about it and also seeking the help that we need. So together, when we practice allyship at an individual level and an interpersonal level, we can create more trusting, psychologically safe, and inclusive spaces for everyone to bring their full self to work. And I can see that some of your actions are really a great starting point for us to make this a reality. And I would like to hand it over to Alonso to share more about some mental health resources that you could leverage and how you could also get involved with the Wellness ERG. Alonso, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ellen, for that nice presentation. So let's take a look at this slide. So the resources that we have to attend to our mental health. So we know that 2020 and 2021 have been really challenging for us. So where can we go, or who can we confidentially talk to? At this point, we should all know the Rome Institute. The Rome Institute is a highly experienced organization used by several UN agencies for their counseling services. Sessions may take between 30 to 60 minutes, and a staff member can have access of a total of 120 minutes. Counseling is available in English, Spanish, French, Italian, German, Dutch, and Arabic. No one, not your manager, nor your HR team, will ever know that you access this counseling. And it is for free. So to get a private, confidential appointment, you can write to the email you see in front of your screen. You can write an email to Petra, or just go to the website to find out more information about the Rome Institute. Likewise, your medical insurance may include coverage for psychological counseling. So go to the HR department or check the webpage of your insurance to find out more details. If it does, do not miss the opportunity to use it. And of course, you can always talk to your HR colleagues or manager if you feel confident and comfortable enough around them. If not, You can always talk to a member of your family, to your closest friends, or a member of your community. So break the barriers to openly talk about your emotions and really answer to the question, how are you? If you go to the next slide, please, Evan. Great. So if you are passionate about wellness and want to really make a difference, you can join our ERG. What you need to do is only to send me an email, and we will love you to have you in our team. We need more hands to implement more activities related to wellness. So do not hesitate to contact me. Just send me an email, and I will be happy to receive you in our group. Thank you very much. Over to you, Edwin.
Thank you, Alonso, for that. So we've come to the end of our session. I just want to say a few thank yous. Obviously to Edwin for leading the session, thank you very much. But also to Alonso from the ERG for instigating this and working very hard over the last few weeks as a volunteer to arrange it, and the team that has really helped him. So thank you to Michelle and to Victoria, who have done everything to make this event happen. We really, really appreciate your help and support. So just to leave you with the thought to consider joining the Wellness ERG. It's a great initiative to be involved in. And wherever you are, we wish you a wonderful day or evening. Thank you for joining us.